Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, death slayers, pheasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks. I'm Useful Idiot. Welcome, and let's go to the good old USA and talk about more about fake news and Russian hacking, all this crazy stuff that's going on out there. And I've done a number of videos, including this most recent series, and this one is about actually what's kind of a small story. I haven't seen that much on it, but it was interesting enough that I want to post it because in the renewal of the National Defense Authorization Act going into the year 2017, the Senate has renewed it, but part of what's inserted in there, buried in the bill at the very bottom, is a whole idea of creating a propaganda center. And this is what's notable and why it ties in with this whole idea about so-called Russian hacking and fake news and censorship and all that, because what they talks about the idea of creating a, quote, global engagement center, unquote, that's going to be headed by the Secretary of State. So I don't really need to go into much more detail other than that to make it sound very nefarious. It reminds me of the movie Brazil, and we have the Bureau of Information Retrieval. And all the wording in this clause in the NDAA is all taken from the Portman-Murphy Act called the Countering Disinformation and Propaganda Act, whose name got later changed to Information Warfare Act. And in it talked about the creation of a, quote, Center for Information Analysis and Response, unquote. So the name of the proposed body has been changed to the, quote, Global Engagement Center, unquote, which sounds certainly a lot less menacing. But it's all about, like it says, countering so-called disinformation and propaganda, which, of course, the United States is heavily involved in. And but we certainly don't want anyone else doing it, so we have to take extreme measures. And this is a good example. It's probably going to get to the point where we're going to have a cabinet level position involved in information and propaganda and that sort of thing. So let's go into some of the wording here. It says, quote, to develop, plan, and synchronize whole of government initiatives to expose and counter foreign propaganda and disinformation directed against UN national security interests or U.S. national security interests, and to proactively advance fact-based narratives that support U.S. allies and interests. And I find that interesting. They want to proactively advance fact-based narratives, of course, because any narrative that the government creates to spread around the world, of course, is going to be fact-based and counter all the bullshit that comes from everyone else but us. So then it goes on to say, quote, to establish a cooperative or liaison relationships with foreign partners, allies, and other entities such as academia, non-governmental organizations, and the private sector, unquote. So the usual cooperation and the melding between the corporate and government interests, the private and public sector. And as we see in our age, this is necessary, and to be thorough and carry off all this on the scope that they want to do, particularly because it's all technology involved, and therefore they need a lot of these private partners, but foreign partners, including foreign countries, obviously, and allies, and then, like I say, other internal entities such as academia, NGOs, and the private sector. So corporations and colleges and schools. So as usual, they want to really be thorough about indoctrination in the domestic environment. So then it goes on as well, quote, for identifying current and emerging trends and information obtained from print, broadcast, online, and social media, support for third-party outlets such as think tanks, political parties, and NGOs, and the use of covert or clandestine special operators and agents to influence targeted populations and governments. So once again, like the wording that we see in a lot of what we're seeing now with the government, they want to be on the cutting edge. They want to be able to see these emerging trends. They want to cut them off before they're even posted online. They want to be able to deal with people before they even get out and communicate. And they're monitoring print, broadcast, online, and social media, and that's where they think all the fake news and hacking is operating as well. And and then supplying support for all the groups that are going to help them develop this so-called true narrative, fact-based narrative that is actually just more lies, but is a government-based narrative. And then it goes on to talk about this organization, this propaganda center, this global engagement center, having the authority for grants and contracts and financial support to civil society groups, the NGOs, journalists, private companies, federal research and development academics. So once again, they're not only want to influence and use all these different elements, including the private sector and schools and academics and scientists, to support the government narrative, but they're willing to pay them, and they'll decide who gets paid and who doesn't based on how much they support the government narrative. So once again, so anybody can be labeled so-called terrorists, anybody can be labeled Russian hackers, anybody can be labeled fake news, and they'll be out on the outside of these systems. And they talk about countering efforts by foreign governments to use disinformation, misinformation, propaganda to influence the policies and social and political stability of the U.S. And like I say, this is obviously aimed at the threat of Russia today, but also the alternative news. And once again, it's all right for government, the United States government and the United States media, and a lot of covert clandestine operations to use disinformation, misinformation, and propaganda to influence in policies and social and political stability of countries all over the world. But now the U.S. feels threatened because somebody might want to do it to them. But in this case, it's funny because it's all made up. And part of the story, too, that's cross-referenced, too, is the fact that apparently there's a broadcasting board of governors that oversaw all these programs that we have that distribute all this disinformation, misinformation, propaganda all over the world, like Radio Free Europe and the like, that used to exist, in the Voice of America, and all these NGOs and media propaganda machinery that we use around the globe. And now it's apparently going to be an executive appointment. They're going to get rid of the broadcasting board of governors, and they're going to have one person that's going to oversee it. And perhaps the Secretary of State under the Global Engagement Center that I just talked about. So things are moving along there. Once again, we might have a cabinet position. We might have some sort of information propaganda czar, our own Goebbels. And but all these really interesting developments that are happening quickly, including this new proposed propaganda center. So it'll take a while. It needs to get funded and constructed and all that sort of thing. But this is the direction things are moving, and it's just amazing that this entire fabricated Russian intervention in the election is getting such legs, and it's so pathetic to see how desperate the Democrats have become. Like I say, it reminds me of what sore losers the Republicans were traditionally, but now the Democrats are getting to be the same way, and they're grasping at every straw right now, including the pathetic Hillary Clinton coming out, and then all these weasel boys in Congress, so there we have it. And then this whole fake news, which is painfully obvious to everyone, is just once again being used to address the fact that the social media and the alternative news has garnered a certain amount of power out there, and they want to address it because it really had a huge effect, particularly because everyone's still in shock that Trump got elected. And so this is part of the backlash as to this whole idea that the Russians did it, or those crazy lunatics on the internet with all their fucking fake news. I'm a useful idiot propagating my own fake news. And as I like to say, I actually create real news about a fake world. I'm useful idiot, don't you be one too?